All right. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron. We got a special interview today for Music Monday. It's on a Monday, and it's Music Monday, and it's about a fantastic album coming out April 5th and other things. We have Evan Greer with us. Evan, thanks so much for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Did I pronounce your last name right?
Yeah, Evan Greer.
Okay.
Rhymes with Greer.
Perfect. Perfect. And our agenda today is all A agendas, activism and the album. So we'll do the activism part first. You, aside from being a fantastic musician who I've gotten into a lot recently, I found some of your stuff on YouTube and then just dove into as much of the catalog as I could. And then, the new stuff is fantastic. And but also you work at Fight for the Future, which when it comes to the net neutrality issue, Fight for the Future has really been knocking it out of the park. I read your recent column on CNBC, and I thought you did a great job. And, to be totally honest, I was pleasantly surprised that CNBC would publish something like that. So that was very refreshing. You don't need to respond to that directly because I don't want you to get in trouble. But I was pleasantly surprised to see something like that being published by a corporate outlet. So that was very refreshing. So bring everyone up to date. What can they do right now for net neutrality? I know that the Save the Internet Act should be coming to a vote soon. What can people do? What is the most up-to-date information there?
Sure thing. So, real quick, it's awesome that we've gotten to the point that we can just sort of say net neutrality and hope that most people know what we're talking about. But really quick, just in case you're one of those people out there who's like, I know this is a thing, but I don't totally remember what it is. Net neutrality is the First Amendment of the internet. It's the basic principle that prevents the company that connects you to the internet, whether it's Comcast or Verizon or AT&T, from controlling what you can see and do once you get there. So, you just mentioned NBC. I was very lucky to have them publish, my op-ed. Without net neutrality, Comcast, which owns NBC, could decide to slow down this podcast or show that you're watching now and speed up NBC, slow down the New York Times. They could decide to block, The Nation. They could basically decide to manipulate how you consume the news in order to favor the services that they own over the services that you want to use. So that's just sort of one quick sample of what's at stake in this. Now, where are we at? And folks probably remember, the internet really was on fire with protest when the Trump administration's FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, repealed these net neutrality protections back in December. Now, we've been basically trying to get them back since then, and Congress is pretty much where that fight is playing out. So now that we're in a new congressional session, about 40 members of Congress who opposed net neutrality lost their jobs in the last election. So that puts us in a bit of a stronger position as we head into this next phase of the fight. And so where we're at now is that net neutrality supporters in both the Senate and House have introduced the Save the Internet Act, HR 1644, which is a very straightforward bill. It's about 2.5 pages long. And basically what it says is, we, Congress, hereby tell Ajit Pai to go himself and restore neutrality. That's, the summary of the bill basically for you.
I'd like it even better if that was the official language. Yeah, it's a great bill though. I looked at it myself. I know you have as well. It is about 3 pages, 2.5 to be specific. And it just says, hey, remember when we got it right in 2015? We're going back to that, which in 2015 was when we officially got net neutrality on the books via Tom Wheeler, who arguably didn't want to do it, but the public made him. And, we had been fighting for official net neutrality on the books for years. Organizations like Fight for the Future, organizations like Free Press have been fighting for solidified net neutrality for years. And that's one of the things I like to remind people. It's like, look, net neutrality wasn't a new idea in 2015. It's not like all of a sudden, oh, we have net neutrality now. We've always had net neutrality since the advent of the internet. It was just a matter of time before the cable companies wanted to see what they could get away with. And when they took the FCC to court in 2014 and the cable companies won, basically saying they didn't have to abide by net neutrality, something had to be done. The right thing was done. And then that right thing was undone.
Right.
So what is the most pertinent detail now? Like, do you have any info on when the vote is going to take place, or are we still kind of up in the air with that?
No, so the timing for us talking today is perfect because tomorrow, Tuesday, the House Energy and Commerce Committee's Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, say that 10 times fast, is going to be voting on the Save the Internet Act. And this is actually, it seems like an obscure procedural vote, but this is actually the most important vote on net neutrality that's going to happen this year. The telecom companies are trying to kill the bill in this committee. They either want to get it voted down or gut it by filling it with amendments that basically make it toothless. And there are 4 Democrats on the committee that have still not co-sponsored the bill. And we can only afford to lose 2 of them or we lose the vote. So Fight for the Future, the organization I work with, we're putting on a big day of action, kind of starting today, carrying through to tomorrow. We're basically trying to make the live stream of the hearing go viral so that these lawmakers know that the whole internet is watching them and that they're not going to get away with it if they try to vote for bad amendments that weaken the bill or vote against the bill. So battleforthenet.com is our kind of nonstop net neutrality action hub where you can find out what's going on, contact your member of Congress, find out where your member of Congress stands, find out how much money they've taken in telecom contributions since last year, which will tell you why they stand where they stand, things like that. Battleforthenet.com, and pay close attention to this House committee hearing tomorrow on net neutrality. That is going to make or break it. If we get out of that committee, we're very likely to get this bill passed through the House. But first, we got to get it out of this committee without the telecoms killing it.
So, and again, you mentioned some of the amendments that would make it toothless. The big thing that I always talk about, and I know you talk about as well, the big thing to look for is Title II. Title II is the FCC designation that designates the internet a common carrier in a telecommunications service, which allows it to impose net neutrality or give us the protection of net neutrality, rather. Without that, it would be considered Title I, an information service, which is radio and TV. And we all know what happened to radio and TV.
Yeah. And well, this is what's actually so brilliant about this bill is that, you know, this debate over Title II, you know, the telecoms have managed to turn it into a partisan issue, which it's just not. You know, it's not a partisan issue. Everyone can agree they don't want their cable company to decide what they can see and do on the internet, where they get their news, how they watch their videos, how they listen to music. You know, not like, you know, from the furthest left to the furthest right, that's one thing we can all agree on is that our cable company sucks and we don't want to pay them more money for crappier internet. Mm-hmm. That said, in Congress, they've really made this Title II thing a divisive partisan issue. But what this bill does is it basically puts the pieces of Title II that we need to uphold net neutrality into congressional law without actually, you know, technically restoring Title II, the thing that Republicans say that they're so against. So it's actually a really smart way of doing it, because theoretically, if, you know, folks on the other side of the aisle had any integrity, they would look at this bill and say, actually, this pretty much does what we've been saying we want to do too, and that, you know, we could make some real headway here. So it's a very smart way of doing it. It puts it on a strong legal footing. But you're absolutely right that we need those core protections that are embodied within Title II. Anything less, anyone that says, oh, I support net neutrality, I just don't support Title II, they're basically saying, you know, I like free speech, I just want to get rid of the First Amendment. You know, which I feel like we do have folks saying these days now and then. So
yeah, you know, ironically enough, we do.
We have to pay careful attention because we've gotten to the point where net neutrality is so popular. I mean, you know, 80% of voters from across the political spectrum want this. So no one's saying I'm against net neutrality anymore. Now what you have everyone saying is, oh, I'm for net neutrality. I just want to do it this different way. And that's what the telecom lobbyists are really pushing. So it's really important to pay careful attention. You know, follow groups like Free Press, Fight for the Future, the EFF, Center for Media Justice, and, you know, folks that are kind of working on this all the time, because the telecoms are really always trying to pull a fast one on this. And you kind of need to stay up to date on that information to know what the right bill to support is. And right now, it's absolutely the Save the Internet Act. That's the only real net neutrality bill in Congress.
Yeah, and thanks so much for doing what your organization does. I mean, organizations like Fight for the Future and Center for Media Justice and Free Press, I mean, that's how that's how I got turned on to these issues in the first place. I started following Free Press in college, and have been, just a big fan of what they do ever since. Last question on the topic before we switch over to the album,
Sure.
the fun stuff. So what is your take on municipal broadband? I mean, I know for me, the way I like to look at it, because I'm fighting to get municipal broadband into my community where I live in Pasadena, California. I've collaborated with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. I am 100% for net neutrality. I am supportive of every net neutrality bill that is out there. I was very supportive of our bill in California, which is being fought out in the courts right now. Yep. But the way I kind of like to explain it is net neutrality is the battle we need to win. Municipal broadband across the country would kind of end the war. So we got to kind of focus on both. Is that something Fight for the Future addresses, or is it kind of like a one step at a time thing? Or
it's a bit one step at a time. And, we're a tiny organization. There's just about 10 of us sitting at our laptops at our kitchen tables and co-working spaces and libraries and coffee shops and sometimes bars across the country, fighting on the issue. So we have to kind of pick and choose where we focus at any given time. But I mean, you're absolutely right. Not only is municipal broadband, super important, and, just having people have, seeing internet access as a basic human right and kind of getting to that point where we treat it as such is going to be super important. But it's also, you can kind of tell how important it is because the telecoms have spent millions and millions of dollars lobbying local state legislatures to make it super hard for municipalities to set up broadband to offer their residents internet access. They see this as super threatening. That just, anything that Comcast hates that much is something that we should all probably be pretty interested in, I would say. I totally agree with you. This is kind of part of the issue. I think this also cuts over onto the kind of internet ecosystem side too, where it's like, not only do we need municipal broadband, we also need, way more competition and alternatives to centralized services like YouTube and Facebook and Google. Basically like the more ways that people can use technology to connect with each other and express themselves in a more decentralized fashion, I'm all for it.
Absolutely. Well, and I know you're based in Boston, correct?
Yep.
So there was that town, I think Charlemont, Massachusetts, that they recently told Comcast, get packing, we're going to build it ourselves because we see that this is a valuable investment to make. And yeah, you mentioned how the cable companies are so against this, and just the fact that they're against net neutrality is just so telling. And they're like, oh, we want to make sure you have a free and open internet. We just don't need net neutrality. I always tell people that's like the equivalent of someone coming up to you and being like, I would never kill anybody. I think killing's terrible, but we shouldn't have laws against murder. I mean, why do we need that? I don't feel like that's necessary. I mean, I would never. It's just, you're going to think that person's kind of creepy and dangerous and might want to kill somebody. That's what you're going to think. So these cable companies, they want net neutrality gone so they can violate the protections net neutrality gives. like that's why they want it gone.
Well, and the other thing that's important there too is that like it's not going to happen overnight. And you saw a lot of shills for the telecom companies. Even just a month ago or so, when it was hitting up on like a year since the repeal, they were like, look, like the internet hasn't come to a crashing halt. Therefore, all those people that were fighting for net neutrality were wrong. And that's just not how policy works. This is tied up in the courts. We're fighting in Congress. The companies know that everyone's watching them. They're not going to start just like blocking websites willy-nilly and doing all kinds of stuff like that while this plays out. It's much more of a slow death. They're going to be kind of slowly testing the limits of what can we get away with? How can we squeeze consumers for a little more money? How can we prioritize the services that we own over services that we don't own? Over time, you'll end up seeing the internet get kind of watered down and feel more like cable TV, where the voices that you hear are voices that are backed by money, and everything else gets kind of relegated to, the slow lane or, not right in front of your face. So again, this isn't going to be something where just like the internet explodes the day after tomorrow. It's going to be a slow death unless we can restore these protections, which is what we're fighting so hard to do right now.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's another just big piece of misinformation they throw out there because it's being battled in the courts. I always tell people, when Ajit Pai said that the loss of net neutrality was going to be good for jobs, he was right on one count. It was great for attorneys who are fighting this on one side or another. They're working plenty. they're battling out in courts all over the country. So yeah, this is tied up in the courts. Of course, we don't see the effects yet, but yeah, that's some of the more misinformation that people like to spread. So one more time before we move on to the album. So battleforthenet.com is where people can go to stay up to date. And are there any petitions up there as of right now? Or
yeah, so if you go to battleforthenet.com, you can fill out the form and instantly contact your representatives. And then it'll take you to a tool that allows you to call Congress. You can call your own reps and then call those members of the subcommittee who are voting tomorrow who haven't taken a position yet, and tell them that you're going to be watching, that the whole internet's going to be watching. So battleforthenet.com is always where you can take action on net neutrality. We always keep it updated to make it easy for folks, because, you know, who wants to like go look up their member of Congress's phone number and call them? We try to make it easy for you to, you know, get more and more people having a voice in their democracy.
Well, again, thanks so much for doing that. And organizations like yours and others similar, they are so essential right now. And I'm so thankful and gracious that they're out there holding the front lines. Let's move on to the album, because I thank you again for letting me preview it. I listened to it. It is coming out on April 5th on Don Giovanni Records, which is a fantastic label out of Brooklyn. Yeah.
Yep.
And She, Her, They, Them is the title of the album. So I when you sent me the album to preview, I listened to it while I was at my gym to start, and the track I happened to hit first was the Statue of Liberty track, which is a very beautiful song, a very heavy song about a transgender youth, and about going through that. And I kind of got a little worried for a second, because I was like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna cry at the gym. I'm gonna cry at the gym. Damn it!" But I didn't. I held it back. It was a fantastic song, a beautiful song. But then, of course, not all the songs were as heavy, but there was a lot going on. Some protest anthems are in there. Some fun party songs are in there. Songs about hooking up in Gainesville, Florida are in there. It has everything you could want from a folk, punk, just fun indie album. I really enjoyed it very much. I'm so excited for the release. You say that it's been 10 years in the making, but you've certainly, been active this entire time. So what do you mean by that specifically?
Yeah, well, so I always joke that it's taken me about as long to put out this album as my kid has been alive, and that's not a coincidence. But I've just spent the past decade so focused on touring and playing music live, and then organizing. So, getting involved in Fight for the Future, helping organize the Rock Against the TPP tour with Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine and a bunch of others, working on campaigns, working on the campaign to free Chelsea Manning and others. This kind of studio work of actually going into the album or going into the studio and listening to the click track and laying down the layers and working with drummers, and like that stuff is not actually my strongest talent. So it really took me quite a while to do it. I was really lucky to have my friend Taina Asili come and produce. I was a huge fangirl of hers when I was like a teenage punk. She used to be the lead singer of Anti-Product, and now has a fantastic Afro-Caribbean outlet called Taina Asili, or formerly La Banda Rebelde, but now just on her own. But so it's kind of been this labor of love, slowly kind of working on this. And I feel like I've now sort of emerged from the trenches, with this record that I'm just so excited to share with folks. There was never going to be a good time to drop this, So the fact that we're on here talking about my single the day before this net neutrality vote, when I'm super busy focused on that, I think is actually just sort of a perfect, that's sort of how I've always oriented toward my music. It's always been completely intertwined and inextricable from my activism. And while not every song is beating you over the head with a protest message, and I do try to, share some of my own story as well. I do try to make music that's at least somewhat utilitarian, and that, can be sung on a picket line, or at least give someone, a queer kid in Arkansas some hope, that they're not alone, to get them through the day or the night or whatever they need. It's been a bit of a process, but I'm just so excited to get it out, and to start today with the first single is out today, featuring Chris from Anti-Flag, and it's sort of an anti-fascist punk anthem. It's up there on the internets and all the places. So definitely hope folks will check it out.
Yeah, I really, well, and I'm from Pittsburgh originally. So I grew up listening to Anti-Flag. I know Chris joined the band a little later, but yeah, I've listened to Anti-Flag for a long time. And I really did appreciate the production because, you know, a lot of the tracks are I guess, is it fair to say like a little less lo-fi than some of your past recordings? But all the kind of just aesthetic is still there, you know, like it still has all the just folk punk, anthem-esque kind of driving force there. And it's just a really, really cool listen. Are you going to be touring? That's the big question.
You know, again, it's like, for me, this is such a balance now between, you know, being super committed to this activist work and wanting to share this music with the world. So I'm definitely going to be doing some shows. I'm planning some release parties in major cities across the country, which will be announced in a little bit. But, you know, I've got an 8-year-old and I organize a monthly queer dance party here in Boston, and I, you know, write for outlets, and I got work to do. So my days of, you know, looping the country on repeat are probably slowing down. And I like to really more kind of be a bit more intentional now and, you know, play some queer festivals, play, you know, shows where I really am excited about the message and the audience and the organizations putting it together, and then build little kind of mini tours around that. But, you know, I'll definitely be popping up around the country, and, you know, I'll always put those dates up on my website and things like that. So, and, you know, I always travel here and there for other things too, and then see if I can't run off and go play a house show somewhere or something. So, yeah, it'll be a little bit here and there, but yeah, I think it's sort of it's different too. You know, it's different, a different world for music. And, you know, one of the reasons I love and care about the internet so much is it just creates this huge megaphone for art and culture. And so, you know, the days of, you know, you don't necessarily have to, you know, rent a van and, you know, burn gas driving around the country all the time to get your music out to the world. So I'm really grateful for that. And I still love going and playing shows, and we'll be doing it quite a bit.
It's really a fun thing because I think we're around the same age, and so we're just old enough to remember like the end of kind of the old school where it was just you know, you put up the flyers and you rented a van or bought a van if you were lucky enough, and you just, you know, as you said, burned the gasoline and went from town to town, and, you know, you knew what the kind of go-to venues were, and you just kind of did your thing. While that is still around, it has certainly evolved, and the internet has you know, has kind of helped in some ways.
Totally. Well, and it's, yeah, I mean, my first tours that I booked, you know, I was calling on the phone. So a phone is a device that, like, no, I'm sorry. You know, like calling venues on the phone to book shows, and then like printing out MapQuest directions in like a binder. Yeah. You know, and like if someone invited you to go to the after party after the show, you'd just be like, I'm sorry, I can't, like, it's not in the binder. Because, you know, this is like pre-GPS or whatever, right? You know, so things have changed quite a bit. But also I just think, you know, there's such an important moment for alternative and independent music. You know, I mean, when I was putting out music 10 years ago, there was almost no one that wrote for Rolling Stone or Pitchfork or Spin or major outlets that, you know, almost everyone that was doing that pretty much wrote about like white cis male indie bands. And that was basically it. And now there's so many more women and young people and people of color and queer folks that are writing for major outlets. You know, the kind of gatekeepers of like what is cool has shifted quite a lot too, in a really powerful way that means we're just hearing from so many more voices than we used to hear from. And so I think that's just really powerful. And, you know, there's just some awesome music coming out these days. And like, I totally agree. I mean, the internet is you know, really lowering the bar. And it's kind of, you know, everyone sort of talks about, oh, the internet has like, you know, totally messed up the music industry. Well, it's shaken up the music industry, that's for sure. And it's definitely given major record labels a moment to have a, you know, reckoning of like whether they need to exist anymore. But for independent artists like myself, it's a godsend. And, you know, I think that's so important that we defend this platform, you know, so that people can create and share their art, because the world needs art now more than ever, I would say.
This is a beautiful way to tie both our topics together. Well done. So where can people go to learn more about the album and check out the single?
Sure. So yeah, I mean, my website's just my name, evangreer.org, like organizer. And, you know, everything's up there. The single's streaming on all the platforms, but you should get it on Bandcamp, because those kids at Bandcamp are super nice and awesome. And, you know, they're really, you know, think about the artist and care about the artist. But it's up on Spotify and iTunes and wherever else you want to get it. But evangreer.org. And, you know, find me on Twitter, find me on social media, say hi. I'm friendly. I'm there. And yeah, I just, you know, would love for folks to take a listen and let me know what they think.
Evan, thank you so much for doing this. Again, those websites, evangreer.org for more about Evan and the single and the album that drops April 5th, She, Her, They, Them, and of course, battleforthenet.com to let your voice be heard to save net neutrality. Evan, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for everything that you do. And can't wait for the album to drop. And please include Los Angeles on that list of cities, please. I request.
All right. I'll make sure I do. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on, and thanks for all you do. And yeah, I'll catch you down the road.
Cheers.